In 1988, two Swiss engineers would create this small company called Bolliger and Mabillard. Little did anyone know at the time that this company would become one of the most influential coaster companies in the world, creating iconic, world-class coasters at major parks. How did they do this? This is the Rise of B&M. To understand the history, let's head back to Z-Force. The history of B&M started with two Swiss engineers, Walter Bolliger and Claude Mabillard. Before they created their company, the duo initially worked with Swiss manufacturer Juvonola. Juvonola often subcontracted their work with Intamin to create their own coasters. This is where the duo honed their craft to create their track and layout designs, and where B&M perfected their iconic box-shaped track design. This would be seen with Intamins from the 80s and early 90s, such as Shockwave at Six Flags Magic Mountain. But in 1987, Bolliger and Mabillard left Juvonola to form their own company in 1988. B&M. B&M only had 4 employees, the 2 engineers and 2 draftsmen. However, initially, B&M's original intentions for the company was to stop making amusement rides altogether. This resulted in their first project being a rotating platform for a restaurant in Switzerland. This idea, however, was very short-lived, because Six Flags Great America in Gurnee, Illinois requested B&M for an Intamin project. Specifically, Great America wanted B&M to reconfigure the trains for their Intamin bobsled coaster, Rolling Thunder. Great America has experience working with the two men from Z-Force years earlier. B&M agreed, and the trains were manufactured. I guess Six Flags Great America was very satisfied with the new trains, because they went back to B&M for their first roller coaster. B&M was a little hesitant to accept the project since this was their first independent roller coaster, but they eventually did. Great America requested B&M to make a stand-up coaster similar to Shockwave at Magic Mountain. They hired 2 extra draftsmen to help complete the project. There was one problem though. They were incapable of fabricating the track on their own. The solution? Clement Steel Fabrications. Having fabricated the track for Aero coasters, B&M asked Clement to make the track for their new coaster. Clement agreed, and to this day they still make the tracks for B&M. With a source for the track, B&M constructed their first roller coaster for Great America, Iron Wolf. Opening in 1990, Iron Wolf was praised for its forces and unique ride experience, as stand-up coasters were a novelty back in the 80s and 90s. Iron Wolf proved to be a major success and would be the start of a fruitful relationship between B&M and Six Flags. While this specific coaster eventually rotted to crap and was relocated to Six Flags America in 2012, it's still a nice piece of history to have. Their next coaster would go to Great America's former sister park, California's Great America. Seeing the success of Iron Wolf, King's Entertainment went to B&M to build a similar ride to Iron Wolf. Opening in 1991 as Vortex, this coaster would fare similarly to Iron Wolf. That same year, B&M built their own custom trains for the Dinwoody Cyclone at Magic Mountain. But the next year, Six Flags Great America and B&M would unveil their next model that would change the game. In 1992, B&M released a brand new concept to Six Flags Great America called the inverted coaster. An inverted coaster is a roller coaster where the train sits under the track. Prior to this, Aerodynamics built a few suspended coasters where the train swung freely under the track. However, due to the design of Aero suspended coasters, they were pretty limited with their layouts. With B&M's, the trains were in a fixed position on the track. This allows the model to perform inversions and other elements not possible on the suspended. They also had to make their own trains and over-the-shoulder restraints since Iron Wolves were from Juvonola. The first one they released on Six Flags Great America opened as Batman the Ride. This coaster opened as one of the most popular rides in Great America. Themed to the DC hero of the same name, guests loved the unique ride experience, visuals, and forceful layout, claiming it feels like flying a fighter jet. This layout consists of whippy loops, corkscrews, a zero-G roll, and a couple tight turns. Now this coaster was very expensive, as Batman cost $7 million at the time, but it was clear that this was their next big hit. 32 inverts were built since Batman's debut. This specific layout was cloned 12 times, 7 of which were in the Six Flags chain. Batman was so successful that other companies started copying B&M's design, but if Batman wasn't game-changing, the next coaster B&M built would be. While B&M built another stand-up and 2 additional inverts, in 1993, B&M unleashed a roaring monster to Busch Gardens Tampa down in Florida. Called Kumba, this would be a massive 7 inversion sit-down looping coaster incorporated into the setting. Like Batman the Ride, Kumba would be praised for its relentless pacing and forceful inversions, with the most praise being the Hell Roll, not to mention that those corkscrews are some of the most iconic in the industry. Batman and Kumba will be the catalyst for the many looping coasters to come. In 1994, B&M introduced 4 more inverted coasters, with 2 that would become very iconic. The first was Raptor at Cedar Point. This Ohio invert would become the biggest inverted coaster at the time, but the other one would be one of B&M's most famous coasters. This would be Nemesis at Alton Towers in the UK. This one is very unique because due to Alton Towers' strict height restrictions, B&M built Nemesis into the terrain. The result would be a coaster that weaves through the trees and rocks. Then in 1995, B&M broke the inversion record at the time with their sit-down looper, Dragon Con at Port Aventura. Throughout the 90s, B&M was creating both record-breaking and high-quality looping coasters. But in 1998 and 1999, a few new concepts and creations would come to life. In 1998, Alton Towers went back to B&M for a new prototype. Having dealt with Alton Towers restrictions, B&M and Alton went for a concept where you dive vertical into the unknown. This concept would eventually become the first dive coaster, Oblivion. Now this simple coaster only consists of the vertical drop and a turn into the station. That's it. But that drop was a novelty due to it being near vertical while also hanging at the edge. Even though Oblivion only stood 65 feet, Alton Towers dug a huge tunnel so that the drop exceeded 180 feet. While the dive coasters had a slow start, 16 dive coasters would eventually be sold, but B&M picked up the pace for new prototypes in 1999. That year, B&M created 4 unique coasters. The first was their own Hyper Coaster. This was a coaster that focuses on height and speed with a strong emphasis on airtime. This was to compete in the coaster wars going on at the time. The first 2 was Apollo's Chariot at Busch Gardens Williamsburg and Raging Bull at Six Flags Great America. These hypers were popular due to the comfort and airtime. This resulted in 18 hypercoasters getting built. The next was the floorless coaster with Medusa at Six Flags Great Adventure. This is identical to the sit-down loopers like Kumba, but the difference is that the train's like a floor, making it freer and more open. While the novelty of the floorless trains did wear out, 13 floorlesses did open before 2013. Now if you've seen my Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket video, you're familiar with how Universal's Islands of Adventure got unique variants of their sit-down and invert, with Incredible Hulk being a launch coaster and Dueling Dragons being a dueling coaster. These 4 coasters quickly expanded B&M's collection. Also, let's not forget that 1999 was the last year the stand-up coasters were a thing with Georgia Scorcher at Six Flags Over Georgia, but their coasters just kept evolving. In 2001, Six Flags Great Adventure built Nitro, the B&M Hyper. This is important because this was the first B&M to lack a pre-drop. Prior to this, B&M's always had a dip before the drop to reduce tension on the chain lift, but Nitro would be the start of B&M foregoing the pre-drop. The next year, B&M developed their next new model in the flying coaster. This is a model where you're placed in the flying position to get that flying sensation. Vekoma and Zamperla attempted their take to less than stellar results. To capture the best comfort, B&M had to develop all new trains for the flyers to include both a leg guard and vest restraints. The first 2 was Air at Alton Towers and Superman Ultimate Flight at Six Flags Over Georgia. While the flying coasters got a bit more mixed results, 11 flyers were sold before 2016. As you can see, these B&M coasters were selling like hotcakes. While they cost twice the amount of a regular coaster, they were known for being reliable, high capacity, and a crowd pleaser, with Six Flags Great America and Alton Towers pushing the boundaries for new B&M prototypes. Those traits are still seen on all B&M coasters today, but after 2002 is when B&M entered a different era. After the early 2000s is when B&M changed their rides. This is when their coasters became less intense and the company barely innovated at all. This is because B&M was trying to be a safe company where buyers could ensure a coaster with no problems. This is different from Intamin's lingo around the same time, where their coasters were some of the best but also always broken all the time. They also realized that the strong G-forces of the past may be too much for some people. This can be seen with a trio of inverted coasters in the Cedar Fair chain, where those coasters felt less forceful than those in the 90s. 1980s. Despite this, B&M still saw success with their pre-existing models. One such example is the first American dive coaster, SheiKra at Busch Gardens, Tampa. This 200-foot dive coaster would be the placeholder for where dive coasters became really popular. They also continued to make hyper coasters, such as the Trio of Hypers in the Cedar Fair chain, and still made looping coasters like Hydra at Dorney Park and Led Zeppelin the Ride at the defunct Hard Rock Park. And even though B&M started creating less intense rides, they are still capable of making rides that pack strong forces. Examples include Tatsu at Six Flags Magic Mountain and Goliath at Six Flags Over Georgia. Then in 2011, B&M produced their first new model in a while in the Wing Coaster. This is a looping coaster where the seats is fixed on the side of the trains. While Intamin did make a Wing Coaster in 2007, that blew up in their face as Furious Baco at Port Aventura is the only Intamin wing rider. The first B&M wing was Raptor at Gardaland in 2011. The Wing Coaster was definitely one of the more popular options, as 16 were built, with 2 opening last year. The 2010s for B&M were dominated by the Wing and the Dive coasters, with a handful of inverts, floorless, hypers, and flyers. Though in 2012, B&M went out of their comfort zone to develop their own Giga Coaster under the Hyper model. This is a coaster similar to the Hyper coasters, but stood 300 feet and focused more on speed. When B&M built Behemoth for Canada's Wonderland in 2008, Cedar Fair was so satisfied that they went back to build a larger Behemoth. This would be Leviathan in 2012. Unlike Behemoth, which exclusively focuses on airtime, Leviathan focuses more on speed and power while still having some airtime. This would result in additional Giga Coasters, Fury 325 at Carowinds, and Orion at Kings Island. Then in 2014, B&M made a questionable move when they debuted their family suspended coaster. Yes, you heard that right. A B&M family suspended coaster. Don't ask me why they thought of this. The first 2 went to Happy Valley Parks in China, and they are a near clone of Freedom Flyer at Fun Spot. Finally, in 2015, B&M created their first LSM launch coaster on their own with Thunderbird at Holiday World, a B&M wing coaster. And also that same year, Cedar Point converted their stand-up coaster Mantis into a floorless coaster Rougarou. But then that same year, Universal announced something that we've never seen with B&M rides up to this point. They announced the Incredible Hulk would close to get a full retrack due to it reaching the end of its service life. Then in 2017, Universal permanently closed and scrapped Dueling Dragons due to its waning popularity and not fitting into the Harry Potter land. This shows B&Ms do in fact have a service life. Despite making high quality coasters that became a top 50 ride, these coasters played it very safe. For the last 2 decades, B&M mostly lacked any innovation that they had in the 90s and early 2000s. This would all change in the 2020s. I'm sure you all know about the show that was COVID-19. This virus caused a lot of money loss for pretty much everyone, and this type of environment caused people to spend way less money. This was bad for B&M because of how expensive their coasters tend to be. For example, Thunderbird at Holiday World cost an estimated $22 million. $22 million! That's more money than an RMC Hyper Hybrid. An extreme case of B&M's cost is Flying Dinosaur at Universal Studios Japan. That coaster cost an estimated $91 million when adjusted from yen to USD. $91 million! That cost is so high, only 3 other coasters cost more than this flyer. And those coasters are immersively themed Disney and Universal family coasters. This is why their coasters were only reserved for major corporate parks, because smaller parks simply couldn't afford these massive rides, especially since they were designed with high crowds in mind. But in this era of lockdowns and recessions, B&M's current strategy just couldn't exist in this new environment. To counteract this, B&M implemented a few changes into their business model. The first was to make their rides smaller. Ignoring the Chinese coasters, did you notice how much smaller B&Ms from the 2020s are compared to similar installations from years earlier? Everyone knows that the smaller the product is, the cheaper it will be. Another is going back to prototype editions. More specifically, they're heading straight into the launch department. This would be seen with 2 coasters from SeaWorld Orlando and a wing coaster from Chessington in the UK. The first at SeaWorld Orlando was Pipeline the Surf Coaster. This is a new generation stand-up coaster from B&M. See, the reasons why B&M's older stand-ups were discontinued was because they were uncomfortable and hurt like hell. This was designed to be more comfortable using vest restraints, a bouncing feature on the trains, and a less intense layout that focuses on negative G's. And it also features an LSM launch, the second to be used on a B&M. The other 2 prototypes go hand in hand with the final change, Dabble and Family coasters. I mentioned how they built 2 family inverts in China. This wouldn't be seen until 2023, where 2 family wing coasters were built at Merlin Parks. The first was Maximus at Legoland Deutschland. This was a really small wing coaster that's meant for tamer guests to be introduced to inversions. The other is Mandrill Mayhem at Chessington. This wing coaster is weird as it's a multi-launch shuttle family wing coaster with an inline twist. If that wasn't weird enough, in 2024, SeaWorld bought 2 more family coasters for their Florida parks. Busch Gardens Tampa got one of their family inverts, although it's a custom layout to fit into the park. The other is Penguin Trek at SeaWorld Orlando. This is the first ever B&M multi-launch that caters to families, and this coaster was needed for this park. These two, along with a smaller dive coaster for Dorney Park, are the newest slate of B&Ms to open. So this is currently where we are today, but notice how many parks that bought a coaster from Bolliger and Mabillard. Even though this costs double the amount of, say, a Premier Rides coaster, major parks love their coasters because they are low maintenance, high capacity, reliable, smooth, and most importantly, the guests love them for the comfort and ride experience. And sometimes they could squeeze it into tight spaces. Look at Monster at Gronalund. It's impressive how they managed to fit that in. With that being said, I hope to see Bolliger and Mabillard continue to make their impressive thrill coasters. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I'm sure most of you have ridden at least one B&M, so which one is your favorite? Leave all that down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, which if you watched to the end and means you did, you could help by giving a like. Also, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. It only takes 5 seconds to do, and that motivates me to make more awesome content just like this in the future. This is the Coaster Flood, riding out.